Dr. Alka Segal-Cuthbert. She's an educator, academic, author, and director and head of education for the campaign Don't Divide Us. She holds a PhD in philosophy and sociology of education from the University of Cambridge. She's also an educational advisor and writes regularly on education for both public and academic publications. She co-edited that book, What Should School Teach? Disciplines, Subjects, and the Pursuit of Truth. Orsolya Ludvig, the marketing and communications director of one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, Hungarian bookstore chains, Libri and Bookline Group. A strategic communications professional with nearly 30 years of practical experience working in multinational companies and 12 years in self-employment. She's a lecturer at the MCC, head of the Corporate Communications Workshop, and mentor at the Leadership Academy. Member of the board of the American Chamber of Commerce since 2020. Anthony Malcolm Daniels, also known by his pen name Theodore Darinth, is an author, journalist, social critic, and physician. Daniels is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor at the magazine City Journal. He's an author of multiple books, such as Our Culture, What's Left of It, The Mandarins and the Masses. Yao Hongjie is a senior research fellow, the director of the Institute of Education History, China National Academy of Educational Sciences. He is also the vice president and secretary general of China Local Education History Research Association, presided over a number of key scientific research projects, and published more than 30 papers in core journals. I'm Enikő Szakos, educational researcher at MCC's Learning Institute, educational advisor of 2 Hungarian universities, former teacher, and the founder of a monthly organized event at the Scruton Café called Book Salon. The discourse surrounding the potential obsolescence and fading relevance of printed books has persisted for years. While some assert that analog books will endure forever, others foresee a future dominated purely by digital formats. In 1993, Peter James published his novel Host on 2 floppy disks. It's labeled as the worst first electronic novel and the forerunner of the apocalypse, which would destroy literature as we knew it. He said, e-books would catch on when they become more convenient to read than the printed novel. James has prognosticated that the popularity of e-books will soar if they can match the ease and enjoyment of printed books. In fact, contemporary reading habits have changed. The proportion of online readers compared to analog readers is increasing. My first question to all of you: how do printed books and digital platforms differ in their impact on the reader's experience? How does the format influence the receiver's mental connection with the text?
Is this on? Yes, it is. Okay. So I suppose, first of all, I'd want to say that I don't think anything digital is going to be the thing that destroys reading books. What will destroy reading books is our own disrespect and lack of understanding of the aesthetic, intrinsic value of literature, which is probably the highest form of reading. I wouldn't say maybe reading Kant might be more difficult, but if you have had an introduction into reading literature properly, you will find Kant easier to engage with at a later point. Online versus books. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Let's not fetishize the technology. It's up to us whether reading and books survive. I think largely, to some extent, it depends on the purpose of reading. If you're reading for information or perhaps just for individual pleasure, then, digital, online, Kindle, book would make perhaps very little difference. But I think reading literature should be, I think we desperately need to make that a very special thing, almost treat it as a kind of something reverential. And when you revere something, especially when that something is an aesthetic work of art, then the embodied experience, the concrete experience, is very, very important. And just 2 quick examples of when books, the embodiment, have been really crucial. when I remember the first book that I read in the public library that I picked up purely by chance, must have been a child of about 11 or 12. I did not know anything about the French Revolution, but the cover of this book with the illustration of Marie Antoinette on it fascinated me. I read it, I was shocked by how a country could behead its queen. I mean, I was just coming out of fairy tales, so the idea of killing a queen was quite extraordinary to me. But that was, you know, I would not have had that experience had it not been for the book. Secondly, 50 years on, going to Cambridge, going to the university library in this huge, wonderful building and stepping in and just suddenly it hitting me that here was the world in books. Here was everything people have thought of for centuries in books. Now, that was marvelous. Now, you could say, oh, even how more marvelous if you could have the world in a little tablet this size. And true, that is a technological marvel. But what a loss. You have no sense of the scale of your own kind of personal orientation to what is written. So I think there is an embodied aspect about reading good literature that I think is best served by the book.
May can give you some addition from the market, representing a bookseller company, which is over 50% of the Hungarian market that we represent. What we see is that books are still very in, so to say, and from our perspective, it is pretty much, doesn't matter whether you read a book, an e-book, or an audiobook. That's from the market's perspective. However, I think all of these formats have their place, representing literature or educational books or non-fiction or whatever. But the printed, especially in Hungary or around this area, is still very much in. People like the smell of paper, people like the covers, just as you said, and I think it's a very important part of a book, how it looks, how it feels like. But I think it's okay if, when traveling, you carry your Kindle. When cooking, you listen to an audiobook. I think it all has its place. Main thing is that people should read. Less and less people read, that's for sure. There's a very stable, large, let's call it population, that read a lot, and a huge that doesn't read anything, and that's bad. And we should somehow bring back the wish after the written word somehow to this group of people. And I think it's also a task for education and for schools to bring it back somehow. It should be considered how children are handed over a book, for example, and what book, to keep them interested and make them interested more and more. So I think printed books are there. Technology is not the enemy for us. I mean, Kindle is definitely not the enemy of books. Spotify, Netflix, and YouTube Shorts, or whatever it's called, these are enemies then, obviously. But I think, they can all live together, but books should not be fully replaced by visual and audio context and text.
I can only speak from my personal experience. I've spent a lot of my life being a bookworm, and I've also had to engage with the world as a doctor, and I always remember what an Anglo-American literateur said. They say that life's the thing, but I prefer reading. And I have often preferred life as reading to life. And I think there is a slight danger that we overestimate the importance of books and the importance that they have to most people. For example, some years ago, I was stuck in Los Angeles airport in a hotel, and I didn't have anything to read, strangely. I can't remember why. So I'm with Somerset Maugham. Somerset Maugham said that he would rather read a railway timetable than nothing at all. And I'm of that ilk, and so I started reading the yellow pages of the telephone directory. This was in the days when there were telephone directories. And it was very informative because I looked up, I wanted to see how many bookshops there were in Los Angeles, and there was a little bit like that about bookshops. And then I looked up private detectives, and there were 20 pages. So one overestimates, I think an audience like this is likely to overestimate the importance of books in most people's lives, and reading, actually, in most people's lives. So recently, for example, my roof sprung a leak in my house, and I got a roofer. I didn't really care whether he ever read a book. I wanted him to repair my roof, and I don't think he did read books. And so I think we in an audience like this might be in danger of overestimating the importance in the whole of human existence to books, because most of us will have lived around books. For myself, I'm obsessed by them. I've written books about books, and you can probably write books about books about books. So I think I would just be careful that we don't project our personal tastes onto the whole of humanity and assume that it's a good thing to read a great deal. Schopenhauer didn't think it was a good thing for people to read a great deal. They thought that books actually prevented people from thinking rather than actually promoted thinking. So there's a possibility of reading too much as well. And I think possibly I've fallen into that trap myself. I feel, like Somerset Maugham, after 2 hours, if I'm not reading something, I get agitated. I can't stand social events that go on for longer than two hours, for example. So, but I wouldn't project my own pathology onto the whole of humanity.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Firstly, I must express my sincere gratitude to the MCC. That's my first to in Budapest, a very beautiful city. I'm honored to have the opportunity to communicate with you. About the printed books and e-books, I would like to share my views from the perspective of the historical development of books in China. More than 3,000 years ago, the oracle bone inscriptions appeared, and gradually formed the most primitive form of books from the 18th century BC to the 3rd century BC. Chinese characters were written on the bamboo slips, on wood slips, and silk. In the 3rd century BC, China invented paper making. Paper became a suitable writing material, more cheaper and more lighter. In the 17th century AD, woodblock printing was invented. In the 11th century AD, marble type printing was invented in China. That gradually promoted to the dissemination and development of course, culture, and education. Starting from the 20th century, the modern book publishing industry entered in China. Currently, the e-books, tablets, smartphones, and e-readers are very popular in China. And the online readers becoming more and more popular. Very, very more common. I think we should answer a question. What are books? What do books mean? Books are a combination of thought, spirit, and technology and art. Books are union of virtuality and reality. We can say that from the form of books is constantly changing, but what remains unchanged is the mission to inherit human civilization and benefit more and more people. So I don't think we should have a lot of worries and worries. Thank you.
If I may just take a minute to reflect on what you said, I think, yes, we can maybe overestimate books, but we cannot overestimate their effect on life, on creativity, on understanding text, or how children develop, or how we grown-ups keep on developing. So I think it's important to differentiate the books itself, whatever it's fiction, non-fiction, and the effect that it can have. And I think that is something that is the more important thing.
Well, if I may speak against myself, I used to write sometimes for a newspaper which asked me to write an article for a proposition and against a proposition, which was a good discipline. But recently I was walking through Père Lachaise cemetery in France, in Paris, where there are very famous writers buried, and it occurred to me that there must be many writers who are not famous buried in Père Lachaise, because most writers are not famous even in their own lifetimes, as I'm sure some people here could attest. So before I managed to find many such writers, and I decided to write a book about these forgotten writers. And I was able to find something out about them on my mobile phone, not very much, but something, and I was able to order their books before I had even left the cemetery. So it was, and these books were very, very obscure. And this seemed to me a very good example of the use of the wonderful modern technology. And strictly speaking, it would have been possible for some of the books that I bought for me to have read them in digitized form. And it's, I think, Google's ambition to put every printed document, book, everything, to digitize it. And one day this might actually happen. But the fact is that if the books that I was interested in writing about had been digitized, I don't think I would have read them in that form. Now, this may be what I would be interested to know is whether this is a fact of my psychology or a sociological fact that would be true of the great majority of the population who might be interested in these things. Personally, I could not reflect on these books in digitized form. But what I'm not sure about is whether this reflects on me or on digitization.
Just one other, well done, Anthony, self-reflection on your own statement, that's a good sign. I wanted just one other thing to draw out. I think there's another distinction to be made between the idea of reading books in a kind of in a general, looser cultural way as a sign of status or, sort of personal cultural capital, which I think is actually quite Philistine, and it's actually a cause of a lot of unnecessary worry amongst lots of families and parents in schools with my son's not reading a book, my son's not reading a book. And I sort of say, well, can your son read? And the mother says, yes. And I said, well, then just let your son be for a while and see, he might come to reading in a few years, which is often the case. However, that's in a general way, but I think there is a very specific role of education here. And I think I would go with, and there, within education, I can tell you, books, in Britain at least, are certainly not in danger of being overvalued. They are very much undervalued. And I think F.R. Leavis's idea of the study of literature in particular being the intelligent study and discussion of literature is lost. It's been entirely instrumentalized. And what we are losing in that is not kind of a cultural capital, cultural status. We're losing a really important realm of freedom. And for me, that freedom, that when really it's rooted in Immanuel Kant, not his critique of reason, but his third critique of judgment, when he identified the imagination as being not just about taste, but about being a really creative force in what it is to be human and in nature. Now, he was more concerned, he didn't develop that idea in relationship to art, he developed it in relationship to the sublime and responses to nature. But that idea was taken up about 100 years later by, this morning they were talking about unknown philosophers. Well, my unknown philosopher is Ernst Cassirer, and he took up that Kantian idea of the imagination as a realm of freedom. It's a place where, again linking back to the earlier discussion on the family, it's possible to encounter a loving family where the mother prostitutes her daughter, the prostituted daughter returns home, and the mother kisses her feet and loves her, where the mother and the father quarrel bitterly, alcoholic and personal abuse, yet when the husband dies, she tenderly tends to him and puts a pillow under his head. That family is in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and it is believable. Now, I'm not saying that is a social policy recommendation or a family policy, but as part of being human, the ability to, even if you don't approve, logically it makes no sense, politically you don't like it, morally you don't like it, but you can understand it. That is the gift of art, and that's what we lose if we give up on introducing the young in schools to literature through books.
Sorry, just I think we can carry on speaking about this very long, but I think it's again an important point to differentiate literature and books. That's two different things. And literature you can read, with all these tools, books, e-books, audiobooks, whatever. And I think that reading literature is important to bring out the imagination, give stories to the people, give relevance to what happens in my life, or that happened somewhere else as well. So that helps a lot. But then again, books itself is a bit more or different. Giving a book to a child is also helping his microfunctions develop. It helps its brain develop. It helps many, many things. And I think even later, if someone, grown up reads a book, even if it's not high literature, maybe just, a nice fiction story, it still calms down the brain and helps focusing. And I think this is something that is very important about books to help mental health. When you read something, you have to slow down. And this rarely happens in any other case. Whatever you do, you pick up your phone and then already you're back in the vivid everyday life. Reading a book, you have to sit down, whatever form you have it, that will help, build stress down, help you focus, that could help your work later on. I think it's very important to have both.
Let me ask this question you just started to answer for the others as well. Because these skills which you were starting to mentioning are needed not only in education but in our lives. So how does these not only online books, I don't want to make online books looking like they are the enemy, but online books and analog books, how can they develop these skills like reading skills and comprehension, cognitive skills?
I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to say it here. I just think it's the wrong question to ask entirely of reading, whatever you're reading, actually, because when you're reading, whether it's a cereal packet or Kant or Newton, you're entering really one of the most abstract forms of symbolic language, and they have different. What separates the literature, the art, is the internal relationships of part to whole, the word to sentence, sentence to paragraph, paragraph to the whole, to the chapter, chapter to the book. So you're entering a complete whole world. And it seems to me that, of course, you can enter that world digitally on a Kindle, and I have done. I did read War and Peace on a Kindle because I didn't want to take the whole book on holiday with me. But I would want to read it again in book form. And I think that there's actually a physical aspect to it. I wouldn't call it a cognitive micro skill or anything like that, because that's just too technical a thing for the complexity and subtlety of what is going on when we're reading, which is reconstruction. It's never just a response, the ridiculous phonic grapheme correspondence thing is really just reducing it to its most banal level. There's a correlation between a work of art as a world in itself, a diegetic world, an imaginary world, and the book in the digital form. You don't know where you are. When you see a book, you've got a bookmark, you leave it for a day or two, you come back to it, and you think, yeah, I've got that much more to read. And it took me 3 days to read that much. So roughly, a lot of, if you like, extra meta information is there, just carried in the physicality of it. Whereas in digital, it's like you're floating in a weightless space in the digital world, which maybe sometimes might be what you want for certain types of reading, but definitely not for literature.
I'm not sure that's actually true, because my wife, who reads digitally, is always saying, I have 10 more minutes of this book to read. And I've read 90% and 99% of it, or whatever percentage. So it will tell you how much you've got left to do, to read, and it will pick up where you left off. So I'm not absolutely sure that is correct. Emotionally, I'm completely in favor of books. I've spent so much of my life reading books that, of course, I want to defend physical books because otherwise I might conclude that I'm a dinosaur. But I'm not sure that what you said was actually correct, that you couldn't know.
You can't see it. It would tell you, okay, it tells you it brings you up to the page where you're at. It tells you you've got 90% left. But what is 90%? 90% could be that many pages or that many pages.
Yes, but you have some idea how much time you've already spent, and you're in favor of abstraction. And so 90% is an abstraction. It's asking you to use your imagination, in fact.
Well, I think it's subjective, how we feel, and I definitely also prefer physical books. I love the smell of paper, I love touching it, I love seeing it, but I think there's, there's an idea why ebooks appeared, and I also take my Kindle when I travel, because that's easier to have more books with you, and not just that much. Again, back to market tendencies, because maybe that's something that I can bring in here, is that the mixture is coming up, and the developments are made towards allowing you reading the physical book, and then when you pop on your plane, then you carry your Kindle, and then when you arrive somewhere and start driving a rented car, you can swap to an audiobook and then go back to the ebook, and the development, the software development will allow you to carry on from where you left off, whatever platform you did. So I think that the mixture is something that is coming up, especially in the US, this is already there. Here, around Europe, it's just coming up. But I think this is more something that is on our lifestyle, that is developed to help our lifestyle, this mixture. And I don't think that physical will disappear ever.
So just a really quick response to that. I totally agree with you for adults, but what I'm talking about, is education, and particularly school education for younger ages. If we do not introduce the specificity of the book there, then there are going to be fewer and fewer opportunities when they leave school to encounter the absolute concrete aesthetic pleasure of reading, not just the text, but the actual physicality of reading. So that's why I'm very insistent that in education, it has to be books. Of course, I totally, you know, and also what you're doing in that is you're sending a cultural message, you're affirming a very important cultural thing, which is that books are important. Books have a very special importance, and they're not, you know, what we're saying is not everything in life has to be convenient. Yeah, sometimes you have to adapt yourself to engage with something important. It's not always about you, in other words.
I agree with you, your point. In my opinion, e-books have many characters. For example, large capacity, convenient, portable, and easy retrieval, and interactive, expressive experience. Despite the strong growth of digital reading, paper books still have their unique and irreplaceable position. Research has shown that people are more likely to enter a deep reading state when reading paper books. In 2022, a national survey in China shows that people still have preference for printed books. In my opinion, both printed books and e-books have their own advantages. Printed books and e-books will coexist for a long time. It's not either this or that, but complete each other. Why not?
Focusing more on education, you already started that topic as well. What should be the role of education in fostering literacy and making kids reading? Or what should be the role of digital books and online books and printed books at the school?
Well, that seems to me to be an empirical question, and if you can, for example, get children to read habitually, if that's what you want them to do, if it is a matter of fact that they will only do so if they have physical books, which I suspect is the case, then that is an argument for promotion of physical books rather than e-books. And certainly another advantage of physical books, especially if they're secondhand, is that it gives you a kind of insight into the effort that has gone into our present situation, because many people have no idea of the efforts that have gone into the advantages and perhaps the disadvantages that they currently enjoy. So, for example, if you go into a medical library, now, of course, we don't need any paper medical journals at all. Everything is digitized. But if you go into a medical library, you will see the immense effort, historical effort, that has been made to get to our present state of enlightenment, if you call it enlightenment, which in a sense I do. Obviously, I wouldn't want to be treated by 19th century methods. So that the physicality of journals and books is is a first stage to appreciating the immense effort that has gone into our present enlightenment.
Say something about education specifically in books. I mean, I think that's really true. I mean, I can that feeling of going into that library at Cambridge, and often, you go there and okay, I need to get the books by this author and that author or this subject. And you go and you find out the classification and you find them. But after a while, what I would do is just go to a random part of the library and pick up a book at random. It wouldn't be totally, I was never going to go and pick up a book on quantum physics, or, because I wouldn't understand it. So it would be within my range, but it would not be tied specifically to my immediate interest. And I think that's less possible in the digital world, because you have to have more of an idea of what's available for you to look at. So I think in that sense, a physical library is more conducive for curiosity and browsing in a more open-ended way. In terms of schools and classrooms in particular, I mean, I have taught classes to read and produce writing on computers. But I can tell you, the best bit of work I ever did as a teacher on reading and writing was getting the class to read picture books, a selection of them, choose one that they were then going to rewrite for their younger brother or sister or a younger member of the family. So they had to engage with the text, the language, and work out an even simpler form of language. And then they were looking at the illustrations as well and choosing their own illustrations, and then got incredibly, perhaps a bit over caught up in whether they were going to use orange or pink ribbons on the cover and stuff. So I had to say, that comes later. You do, write the draft first. But that I think, I don't think I could replicate what was learnt in that digitally.
For sure. If you allow me to bring in something else as well, I think you have to differentiate again the age groups. When you speak to a university student, I don't mind if the university student reads an ebook, especially if it's on quantum physics or medicine. It's a lot easier. But I think when we speak about books in education, that is, for me, too late. I mean, I have 3 kids, and I think if I wouldn't have read them fairy tales and stories when they were really little, where they had no choice whether it's going to be a TV or a bedtime story, I had to make the choice that it was a bedtime story. And if they hadn't seen me reading on a Sunday afternoon, I think when they got to school, it's a bit too late to expect the school to make them a reader. I think it all starts at home. You said about this lady who's worried that her son's not reading. Well, my question would be, okay, might not be the case, but has he ever seen her reading? Sitting down in a corner and read for an hour or so. So I think it's important that schools have a different approach toward bringing books nearer to children. But when it starts there, it's too late. We have to take the responsibility in the families, grandmas, grandpas, and parents, to make the children see a book in their hand, whether it's a bedtime story for them or whatever story for the grandma herself.
It might be worth comparing going into a bookshop with Amazon. Amazon, you have, or at least I have a completely instrumental view of it. I just search for the book that I want. Whereas if I'm in a bookshop, I'm easily distracted to other subjects, and then I start learning about something of which I had no idea whatever before. And if that is a good thing, then obviously there's a superiority to physical books.
Mr. Yao?
In the digital age, I think it's not enough whether you read a paper book or study on an electronic device. Mixed use must be mastered. It's a way to improve the learning effect. Maybe use the audio and video materials on the internet to supplement the textbook is a good way to improve the children's understanding of the world and combine the knowledge and understanding of the people.
Can I just quickly say something on the parents thing? Because I can see that, of course, I'm not against parents and grandparents modelling, reading and love of reading. But I suppose I would want to put two caveats on that. First is that generations have learnt to read without their parents. My parents never read to me, and we didn't even have that many books in the house, as it happens. But they did have a general belief in education. And secondly, I would always want to err on the side of freedom or lack of intervention in the family. And I think that kind of argument, which is quite common, I think can place a real burden. It comes back to sort of the status thing. Parents get awfully worried about their kids' results, achievement, and their reading. And that needn't be the case. I don't think it is too late if schools do it properly, if they understand and respect reading and have the freedom to introduce reading to children in different ways, because not everybody will necessarily get it all at the same time in the same way. So those are the kind of requirements that I think could help in,
Just a tiny argument with that, because I fully agree that when we were young, maybe our parents didn't read. My grandma read a lot to me, but then when you entered school, or when I entered school, there were no mobile devices, no electronics, etc. So we were easier to bring into books and the stories and the pleasure of that. Nowadays, if a kid doesn't see books and reading at home, by the time he or she gets to school, they already know how to use the tablet, they already watch Netflix, YouTube, whatever. So it's a lot harder for the school to bring in this enjoyment of reading, which is a slow pleasure, to be honest. Whereas the digital platforms bring an instant, fantasy-less story to their face. So I think what we experience as children is very different to what's happening now.
Some of you already shared your ideas what would happen with printed books. Either they won't disappear, they will coexist. But I can see some teachers here, so do you have some practical pieces of advice how to keep printed books alive in the schools, in our lives, how to keep them in our lives?
I give you one, again, from the market perspective, and then I hand over to the education professionals. What nowadays publishers do is to make books attractive again. And to enter the platforms that we were just discussing about, like TikTok has now the BookTok hashtag, and then it's very fashionable for some novels to be read. Now books have different layouts, for example, even the paper edges are printed, so it's prettier. So I think the market is thinking a lot, and publishers and designers are thinking a lot how to make it more attractive. And then also this development, software developments to make this mixed use possible, that is something that will also help.
I can't disagree entirely, but I think there's an element of making things unattractive to children. I think education should be not relevant to their lives. They should not be immediately attracted to things. For example, I've noticed that playgrounds are now full of bright primary colors, presumably because that immediately attracts children. If we look at the pictures in a book called Winnie the Pooh, it's a famous English children's book. The pictures that are used in that book used to be very tender and rather beautiful line drawings, and now they've been completely replaced by crude, primary colored, very bad drawings. And that is absolutely universal. And the basis for that would be that they are more immediately attractive to children. So actually, children's books should be an aesthetic education as well as something that immediately attracts them.
I remember, sorry, just got to share this anecdote with you. Taking my, how old would she have been? About three? She wasn't quite reading yet, but she was going to a nursery. She was in the buggy, and we went into some shop, and there were books on a kind of stand, and immediately she started. And you know, when you're with your young child, you understand all their babbling as if it's language. And actually, she was saying, "I can't find this, I can't find this," which sounds incomprehensible. But what she was saying was, "I can't stand this." And it was a line from one of the books that she had seen on the shelf that she had been introduced to in the library. And so obviously that was not a cognitive logical thing. That was an aesthetic a response based on an aesthetic experience of that book. And and it was a really good book, as it happens, a good, by Jill Murphy, an excellent children's author. And what can schools do? I think it's really very simple. You need to have a library. You need to have a school library, and you need to have a librarian, and you need to have a really wide selection of books that are chosen, not for their political messaging, but for their literary worth. I think that's quite simple.
And presumably the restriction of use of telephones and such like in schools.
Yes, I'm for that, yes.
Just a tiny note on Winnie the Pooh. The drawing, the old one, still exists. So it's also up to you or the mother which book she'll pick, because it's still being reprinted with the original drawing, which is beautiful, and the bright, colorful one that you don't like. But I think the target group is different for both books, and I don't mind if they choose the brighter one, as long as they read at all.
Will printed books disappear? When the e-book first appeared in 1990s, some predicted that the paper books would soon disappear like newspaper. But we all know that's not a fact. There is an old saying in China, 1,000-year-old paper, which means that paper can last for 1,000 years. Perhaps one day, printed books will disappear. How long will that take? I hope it will be 1,000 years.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions. We received some great questions from the audience, and the first one I chose is connecting to what Alka just said. And in Hungary, there is a recent and kind of heated debate about the mandatory books in schools, whether they are old-fashioned and they are causing more harm than benefits to be read. And there is a question: should we pre-select various books and make them mandatory, or let children read anything they please, let them only read something?
Can I answer? At home, I think it's up to the parents what you decide, direct your children to. Schools, it should be up to mainly teachers who, unfortunately, you cannot rely on the profession today to make an aesthetic judgment, but that's what it should be, the literary worth of the books. And then when they're older, it's up to them. It's up to them what they read. I think the idea of books being harmful is not true. It's not. I mean, there is that really pernicious idea at the moment of a child cannot engage in a book unless they see themselves represented in the book. And if they don't see themselves represented in the book, it's a form of what somebody called earlier epistemic violence, which is just nonsense, because obviously children have imaginations, and that is what reading a book is meant to engage in. But so, yeah, I think, you know, it would be different. You know, as a parent, I'd let my children read books that I think weren't particularly valuable, but they just enjoyed them because they're young kids, and that's fine. But I wouldn't want schools to be just teaching them that.
If I may answer as a mother, I'm okay whatever they read, but I think here in Hungary there is a mandatory selection of books that children need to read, and sometimes they're really very slow for the kids of today. And the harm that is being debated here is about, you know, taking the interest out of books because these books are too slow. So that's the debate about. But I think it's, again, depending on the teacher, how he or she brings it to the children. But that's difficult, you know, making teachers motivated and making them enthusiastic when they have their everyday problem as well. It's more and more difficult, and it's very... You know, you cannot rely on it really. So it happened to us that my daughter had to read a book she didn't like, and I loved that book. And I started to tell her about how I felt when I read it and which parts I really loved and why. And then she started, oh, well, I read it somewhat different, so let me go back and check. And then she enjoyed it, but I had to make it attractive to her and also explain a bit. I don't know what happens in school classes, how they bring about the books, and it's, you know, it's very subjective. One teacher does it well, the other one does not. So it is very, very difficult, but I think there's a selection of stories mostly that, you know, is just a part of education, and it has to be known.
No comment. Okay.
Yes. Something to say just on that. The idea of books being too slow or too difficult or too off-putting, I think you hinted at the answer there, which is that you just need better I say English because that's, you know, Hungarian. Teachers. You need the teacher education needs to be completely rethought, because at the moment teachers have no idea of what even aesthetics would mean, and they would not really know how to choose a good book for children without resorting to principles from outside of literature itself. So it would be what's easy, what's relevant, what might help them feel good about them, self-esteem, what might be politically correct, what might make them financially literate. You know, I mean, it would just be a host of a million intrinsic reasons, rather than this is a lovely book. Now, if you start with this is a lovely book, this is a worthwhile book, this is worth spending time on. And I have done, and you know, I've done this. I mean, this isn't just speculative theory. I have taught 9-year-old Bangladeshi kids who are failing at under their expected levels in their classroom English. I have not taught them all of Keats's Ode to Autumn, because I only taught them for 1 hour, you know, a week. It was a supplementary school, but we did, you know, the first 2 stanzas, and it took us about 6 weeks. And I did it through engaging them aesthetically, through the prosody of the words, getting them to say it, guess the meanings. And at the end of it, they said to me, "That was a really beautiful poem, miss." And I thought, my job is done, right? And that's it. You know, but that's, I'm not, you know, there's nothing genius about me, right? Teachers just need to be introduced to their subject in that way so they can teach it.
There is another very interesting topic being brought up. It's a quite technical question. What can we do about textbooks from formal education not looking appetizing, motivating to read? If the person who asked allows me to rephrase it, what do you think of textbooks, which are, you mentioned earlier that one of the things to popularize books is to make them look more engaging. What do you think of textbooks at school? If any of you have any idea.
They're very profitable. I mean, I would imagine that the problem with textbooks, I suppose, is that there are a lot of ideological conflicts, especially if you're talking about history textbooks. There'll be a lot of ideological arguments over what they should contain, and then you will have constant changing and arguments over them. But I don't think I have no solution to that problem, that particular problem. Textbooks of algebra will presumably remain very similar. But I have nothing else to say on that.
Thank you. There is a lighter question, and probably the last one. What was your favorite book? And I'm always asking if I have a book club, what would be the book which the participant would recommend? So I think if you're talking about the value of books, you could give us something to take.
At what age?
Yes.
You choose right now.
Too much freedom.
I thought this was the lighter question.
For people who read, it's very, very difficult.
In about a month ago, my wife and me, along with my daughter, we started reading a great Chinese novel, Dreams of the Red Chamber. The work was finished in about 3 weeks. It's a very happy time. I think the novel was my best loved novel. Read the Dream of Red Chamber.
Thank you. I'm sure there was one book which came up in your mind.
Well, now it did, because I was just considering what Yao said. One book that brought me back to reading, because I also didn't quite like the mandatory books. But thank God I had my grandma, who was a teacher, and at the right moment she handed me The Wuthering Heights. I think I was around 13, 14, and it captivated me straight away. I forgot to go out for lunch. So I was just reading at my grandma's place, and it really brought me back. And then after a while, she handed me another book, and okay, I managed the mandatory ones, but I didn't really care. I was asking my grandma what to read next. But the first was Wuthering Heights.
Well, if we use the method of psychoanalysis, the first thing that comes into your mind, then in my case it's a book called Father and Son by Edmund Goss. But I don't make any claims for it being the greatest book ever written or anything like that.
It's okay. Alka?
Well, I was torn between Kant, but then that's not really a novel, and it came to me very late. But and I haven't read all of it. I'm just going to be honest; it's kind of the prefaces and a bit more. But the book that I suppose, apart from the Marie Antoinette book, which was a history book, I suppose it would be Colette's Le Blé en Herbe, The Ripening Seed, and not because it's the greatest book ever written, but because I can still think of the mood when I read it, of the seaside and the descriptions of the colours and the skin.
Another book that comes to mind is Turgenev's Fathers and Sons, which is
Thank you.
book.
Thank you very much for your answers. Thank you for the questions you had and your attention, and enjoy the rest of the conference.